Today's lesson is about solving multi-step equations. The target for this lesson is that you will be able to solve equations in one variable that contain more than one operation. So grab a sheet of paper and something to write with, and follow along with me as we go through these notes together. Before we start solving, we're going to go through the steps to solving a multi-step equation. And to help us remember the steps, we're going to use the acronym SAM. So each step will start with S-A-M. Step 1, the S. S stands for simplify. There's two pieces to simplifying, and you were taught both of these pieces earlier this school year. Part A, we need to distribute, if you see parentheses, and step B, we need to combine like terms. Step number 2, we need to add or subtract. And what I mean by that is we need to move the constant to the opposite side of the variable. These two steps here will be like solving a two-step equation. So the goal is to isolate the variable, and that means we need to move the constant to the opposite side. Finally, step 3 is going to be to either multiply or divide by the coefficient, and that'll be your final step. If you follow those 3 steps in order, you should have no problem solving your multi-step equations. If you're still writing, pause the video at this point because now we're going to move on to solving some examples. Example 1, solving equations using the distributive property. So we need to solve each of the following. Problem A says negative 24 equals 6 times 2 minus x. So I'm going to find the equal sign, I'm going to draw my line down the middle, and I'm going to walk through the steps of SAM. So the S stood for simplify. Simplify means we need to either distribute or combine like terms. This problem has distributing. As soon as I see parentheses right off the bat, I know I need to distribute. Distribute means you take the number out front, you draw arrows to each term inside the parentheses, and then we multiply it in. So 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times a negative x makes negative 6x. Remember, minus and negative mean the same thing. So I'm combining these together so it makes one term. On the left-hand side, I'm just going to bring down the negative 24. So that takes care of the S. That step is done. The next step is to add or subtract. So it's just like solving a two-step equation. I box off the variable and make sure you include the sign in front. So I'm going to box off the negative 6x. Outside of the box, I have a positive 12. To move that to the other side, I need to do the opposite and take it away. So let's minus 12 on both sides. These will cancel. Negative 24 minus 12, I have the same sign, so I add. I keep the sign of the larger number. That gives me negative 36 equals, and then on the right-hand side, I just drop down my box. So I drop down the negative 6x. So that takes care of step 2. Final step is either to multiply or divide. So this says negative 6 times x. To undo that, I need to divide both sides by negative 6. The right-hand side will cancel. I now have the x isolated all by itself. And on the left-hand side, negative 36 divided by negative 6 makes a positive 6. So final answer, x equals 6. So that's how you solve an equation using the distributive property. Let's try one together. Take a look at problem B. And again, we're going to walk through the steps using the acronym SAM. So step 1 was to simplify. And by simplifying, we need to look to see if we can distribute or combine any like terms. I can distribute in this problem. I'm going to distribute the negative 2 to both terms inside the parentheses. Which one of these answers shows the correct answer after I distributed? It should be negative 14 plus 8x. A negative times a positive will make this be a negative, and a negative times a negative will make this turn into a positive. Bring down the equals 10. That's as simplified as that equation is going to get. So step 2, I need to either add or subtract, depending what's going on. I box off the variable. To get rid of this negative 14, what should I do? I need to add it, so I will add 14 to both sides. My 14s will cancel. I drop down the 8x equals, and then on the right, 10 plus 14 is 24. The last step, M, stands for multiply or divide. So if I go back to my problem, I have one more step to get the x all by itself. What do I need to do? I need to divide both sides by 8. These 8s will cancel, so now the x is all alone, equals 24 divided by 8 is 3. How are we feeling? So far, so good? We have a couple more problems to get through. So let's scroll down and take a look at the next 2 examples. Problem C says negative 20 equals 5 times 3 minus x. So I'll find the equal sign, draw my line down the middle. I'm going to distribute that 5 into both terms. So I'll start with the negative 20 equals 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times this negative x makes negative 5x. I'm going to box off the variable. Outside of the box, I have a positive 15. To undo that, I'm going to subtract 15 from both sides. Negative 20 minus 15. I have the same sign. Same signs I add. So 20 plus 15 is 35. I keep the sign of the larger number. 20 was larger and there was a negative out front, so my 35 also needs a negative. Equals, and I just drop down the negative 5x. One more step to undo this multiplication here. I need to divide both sides by negative 5. So I get x equals, negative times the negative will be a positive. 35 divided by 5 is 7. So final answer, x is equal to 7. One more problem for this section. So let's take a look at problem D. I'm going to draw my line down the middle. What's the first step? I need to distribute. Anytime you see parentheses, you have to distribute to get rid of those first. Which one of these answers shows the correct distributing? It should be 7y minus 14 equals 28. I'm going to box off my variable. What's the second step? I need to move the constant, so I'm going to add 14 to the other side. Negative 14 and positive 14 are opposites. They will cancel. I drop down the 7y equals 28 plus 14 is 42. What's the final step? I need to divide. I'm going to divide both sides by 7. These will cancel. Y equals 42 divided by 7 is 6. So final answer, I get y is equal to 6. All right, so now we've done 4 examples where you had to distribute. We're going to move on to the next set of examples. And the next set is all about combining like terms after distributing. So you'll notice these problems are a little bit longer because not only are we going to have to distribute, but we will also need to combine like terms. So let's start working through these. Problem A says 6x minus 4, parenthesis, x minus 1, equals 14. So right off the bat, I see parentheses, so I'm going to use the acronym SAM, and I'm going to simplify. So the first part of simplifying is distributing. I need to distribute the number that's immediately in front of the parentheses. Be careful, the number in front of the parentheses is a -4. You always include the sign that's in front of it. So because there's a minus there, that minus needs to stick along with the 4 when we do our distributing. If I forget to include that minus, it's going to mess up the entire problem. So I'm going to draw my arrows so I remember what to multiply. And let's go ahead and do it. I'm going to drop down that 6x. -4 times x is -4x. -4 times -1 makes +4. Negative times a negative makes a positive, equals 14. So now we've distributed, but these problems will also have like terms. Like terms means that I have two terms that have the same variable, or I have two terms that are constants. And when you're combining like terms, you need to focus on the same side of the equation. So you're going to notice one side of your equation is going to be pretty long. It's going to have a lot of terms. And we want to simplify that and make it a little bit smaller. So if I look at the left-hand side, I have a lot of terms over here. So that tells me something can get simplified. So I see a 6x and a -4x. I'm going to go ahead and underline those. Because they both have an x, they can be put together, and I do exactly what it says. So 6x minus 4x is 2x. The +4 can't combine with anything. This line that we draw at the very beginning is like a wall, and we can't cross the wall until we actually start solving, so I just have to bring down that +4, equals the 14. That's as simplified as this equation is going to get. I've distributed, I've combined like terms, that's simplified. So step 1 is done. Step 2, I'm going to box off my variable, and I'm going to add or subtract my constant. The constant's positive, so to undo that +4, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. The 4's will cancel. I can bring down the 2x, equals 14 minus 4 is 10. Step 2 is now complete. One more step. To undo this multiplication here, I need to divide both sides by 2. This will cancel, and I'm left with x is equal to 10 divided by 2 is 5. So that is how we solve a multi-step equation that requires combining like terms after distributing. Let's try one together. Let's take a look at problem B. I'm going to draw my line. I'm going to set up the acronym SAM so I remember my steps. So remember, simplifying has two parts to it. I need to distribute first, and then I need to combine like terms. So I'm going to take care of the distributing. I'll take the 2, and I will draw the arrows. And make sure you only draw arrows to the terms that are inside of the parentheses. Once the parentheses end, you stop. So I'll go to solve. I get -82 equals. Then I'm going to distribute. Which one of these is the correct answer after distributing? I would get 14x minus 16. And then, of course, I just bring down that +4 because that was not part of the distributing. So the distributing step is done. The other part of simplifying is combining those like terms. In the last problem, we had two terms that had an x, so that was super easy to point out. This problem, I don't have that, but I do have two terms that can be combined. Remember, we said constants can be combined as long as they are on the same side of the equation. So on the right-hand side, since that's my side that has a lot of terms, I see a -16 and a +4. Those are two constants, and they can be put together. So I'm just going to drop down the -82, and I'm going to drop down the 14x. Then I'm going to do exactly what this says. So -16 plus 4, those are different signs. Different signs I subtract. 16 minus 4 would give me 12. I keep the sign of the larger number. 16 is larger, and there was a minus in front of it, so my 12 gets a minus in front of it. Or if you're using a calculator, just type in exactly what you see. -16 plus 4 will spit out a -12 for you. All right, I am totally simplified now. This entire step is done. So, second step, I'm going to box off the variable. What should I do next? I need to move the constant, so I'm going to add 12 to both sides. My 12s will cancel. Negative 82 plus 12. I have different signs. Different signs I subtract. So 82 minus 12 leaves me with 70. I keep the sign of the larger number. 82 is larger and it had a negative, so my answer gets a negative. Equals 14x. What's the final step? I need to divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by 14. Again, you guys are allowed to use a calculator, so use it. Negative 70 divided by 14 gives me negative 5. Negative divided by a positive will make a negative. Equals x. All right, we got a couple more we need to take a look at. So I'm going to scroll on down and let's take a look at the next set of problems. 13 looks like it's really long, so we're going to make sure we take our time with this problem. It's nothing you can't handle. It's just a pretty long problem, so we got a lot going on here. Let's draw the line down the middle and start solving. So step 1 is to distribute. I have 2 sets of parentheses, so I'm going to have to distribute twice. One for the first set and one for the second set. The first set of parentheses has a negative out front, so that negative is going to be distributed to both of these terms. Negative times negative 3 makes it a positive 3. A negative times 5x will make it a negative 5x. You could also rewrite this as a negative 1. You could squeeze a little 1 out here and then distribute that if that makes more sense to you. The second set of parentheses, if I look out front, I had a 3. So that 3 will get to distribute it inside of these parentheses. 3 times 4 makes positive 12x. 3 times 1 makes positive 3. And then, of course, on the left-hand side, I need to bring down that 13. So we've distributed. Now to simplify, we need to look for like terms. And we're going to have 2 sets of like terms in this problem. So let's start with the x's. I always like to start with the x's. Let's go with that. I see a negative 5x and a positive 12x. So I'm going to kind of squiggly underline those so they stand out. I do exactly what it says. So a negative 5 plus 12, those are different signs I subtract. 12 minus 5 is 7. Keep the sign of the larger number, so 12 is bigger, it's going to be positive 7x. I also have these constants, so I have this 3 that I'm about to circle, and I have this plus 3 that I'm circling. So constants can also be put together as long as they're on the same side. So 3 plus 3 makes a positive 6. That is a lot more simplified than what we had above it. We want to simplify because it makes your equation smaller and much easier to work with. And then, of course, don't forget, equals 13. All right, 2-step equation, we can do this. I'm going to box off the variable. Outside of the box, I see a positive 6. The opposite of that is to subtract 6 on both sides. 13 minus 6 is 7. Equals, and bring down the 7x. One more step, I need to divide by the 7 on both sides. This side cancels. And then 7 divided by 7 just gives me 1. So final answer, x equals 1. All right, one more problem, and you're going to help me do this one. So let's take a look at problem D. What should I do first? I need to distribute. Anytime you see parentheses, we have to distribute. The number out front of the parentheses is a negative 2. So when we distribute, make sure you include the negative in your distributing. Which one of these answers shows the correct distribution? I'm going to bring down the 5x. And then if I distribute, negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 3 makes positive 6 equals 30. All right, distributing is done. Now I'm going to look to see if I can combine any like terms. The left-hand side has a lot of terms. What can be combined? the 5x and the negative 2x. They both have an x. I do exactly what it says. So 5 minus 2 is 3x. The 6 is lonely. It doesn't have anybody to pair up with, so we're just going to bring down the plus 6 equals 30. We're halfway done. Box off the variable. And what comes next? I need to undo this positive 6. So let's subtract 6 from both sides. These will cancel. I drop down the 3x equals 30 minus 6 is 24. What's the final step? We need to divide by the coefficient. So divide by 3, divide by 3. Final answer, I get x is equal to 8. And that takes care of solving multi-step equations that have both distributing and combining like terms. I do have one more example for you. So I'm going to scroll on down. And we have an application problem we're going to do. These are the type of problems that you'll see on state testing, like PARCC or NJSLA, the SAT when you guys take that when you're juniors. So it's really important that you're able to solve application problems. Not only do you need to be able to solve, but you need to be able to create equations and make sense of what you just did. So let's read this problem aloud. It says, a group of 5 friends are going to a baseball game. Tickets for the game cost $12 each, or $60 for the group. The group also wants to eat at the game. Hot dogs cost $2.75 each, and bottled water costs $1.25 each. The group has a total budget of $85. If the group buys the same number of hot dogs and bottles of water, how many can they afford? So to help us set up this problem, we set it up into a couple different pieces. First, we're going to break down all the pieces of the problem. Then we'll talk about setting up the equation. Then we'll talk about solving it and what the solution actually means. So let's start with the beginning. The first thing we are asked for is the cost of n hot dogs. We don't know how many hot dogs we are getting, but we know the hot dogs cost how much? Hot dogs cost $2.75 each. So I'm going to say 2.75 n. Next, I need the cost of n bottled water. I don't know how many bottles I'm getting, but I know that the water costs $1.25 each. So, based on that information, what should I write here? 125 n, because each bottle of water costs $1.25, and I don't know how many I'm buying at this point. The next section, I need the total cost of the tickets. So they gave us 2 different numbers, but the cost for the entire group is really the one I want. It's just easier to work with. So for everybody to go, I'm going to need that 60. And then finally, we were asked for the total budget. So how much money did they have to spend? And if I go back and look, it says the group had a total budget of $85. So the budget is 85. All right, now that we've set up each piece of the equation, we're going to go ahead and put that all together to make an equation. So the first 3 things all represent the cost of something, things that are being bought. They're buying hot dogs, and they're buying water, and they're buying tickets. So because I'm buying these 3 things, those 3 things need to be added together. So my equation will say 2.75 n plus 1.25 n plus 60. That represents the hot dogs plus the water plus the tickets equals, and the budget was $85. Let's go ahead and solve this equation. And it's a multi-step equation, so we're going to use all the skills that we just talked about earlier today. So I'm going to find the equal sign, draw my line down the middle, and I'm going to go through my steps. So simplify. I can't distribute in this problem. I don't see any parentheses, but I can combine like terms. What are my like terms in this problem? The 2 terms that have an n, the 2.75 n and the 1.25 n. So if I add together 2.75 plus 1.25, and I add those together, that'll give me a total of 4, or 4.00. So I'm just going to simplify that and make it say 4n plus 60 equals 85. What's the next step? I would box off my variable, and to move the positive 60 to the other side, I'm going to subtract 60. Minus 60, minus 60. This side goes away. I drop down the 4n equals 85 minus 60 is 25. What's the final step? I need to divide by 4. So the 4s are going to cancel. N equals, now you could either do this division by hand, you could type it in a calculator and it'll give you a decimal, or really you could just leave it as an improper fraction, but the improper fractions aren't super useful when we're doing real world problems. So I'm just going to turn it into a decimal for us. 25 divided by 4 is going to give me 6.25. So that's the solution to the mathematical problem. However, this was not originally a mathematical problem. This was a real world application problem. So if I go back and I look, I was trying to figure out how many hot dogs and how many bottles of water they could buy. So this answer is telling me that the group could buy 6.25 hot dogs and 6.25 bottles of water. Does that make sense? No. I can't buy, a quarter of a hot dog or a quarter of a bottle of water. Nobody's going to sell that to me. So the answer has to be a whole number. So therefore, the group can afford to buy 6 hot dogs and 6 bottles of water. I have to round down. I can't round up because then I'm not going to have enough money. I'm going to be a little bit short, and I can't afford to buy 7 and 7. I could, of course, round down, and I'll have a couple dollars left as change, but that's what I'm going to need to do. So I need to round down and buy 6 hot dogs and 6 bottles of water.